Good afternoon. I'd planned to do something about James Joyce and anti-Semitism at a later point during these little short videos, but I can't exempt myself from what's happening around me, as it would be disrespectful to the living. I know we are here to a degree worshipping the dead and the fictional, but if the point of B-LOU-msday is that it is a book of life and humanity and a miraculous work of joy, then let's connect it with the living today. Ulysses covers so many things, subjects that Joyce himself was interested in as a polymath, and all manner of things that he saw in the Ireland of the time. So it's not a coincidence that he makes the lead protagonist of the novel, Leopold Bloom, a Jewish man. It would be important to note that in Europe at the time, the racism du jour was anti-Semitism, with the Dreyfus affair still continuing unresolved for another 2 years after the setting of the novel. Matched to the recent increases in anti-Semitic rhetoric in Britain and Germany that was particularly happening at the time, it would be the closest match to the racism we're seeing here in the United States. And elsewhere, I also should add. Anti-Semitism had been rife throughout Europe for the most part since the anti-Semitic purges in Europe during the Middle Ages and the Inquisition. Arguably, within Shakespeare's work, Othello has more respect in his play than Shylock does in his. And as a continent that was otherwise somewhat limited in its DNA diversity, anti-Semitism was the more prominent issue for much of the past millennia. That said, it is still quite analogous to the experiences here within the United States, where racism grows out of a history of slavery. Joyce, by and large, was a dedicated defender of the minorities from bigotry. He's not perfect by any means, but in the light of an anti-Semitic Europe, he is very much on the side of the Jewish people. He had, back in 1904, when he was back for his mother's funeral, he had been helped by a man called Alfred Hunter, who had extracted him from a fight he had gotten into when drunk, and he had looked after him and made sure of his well-being. Hunter was believed, or at least accused, by many people of being Jewish. After this incident onwards, if not before, Joyce had taken a great interest in all things to do with Jewish people. He was a studier of the Talmud and in many ways was a defender of Jewish identity. In Trieste, he was in the process of writing Ulysses and took great interest in details about the faith, learning much from Italo Svevo, who was a Catholic but of Jewish heritage. Towards the end of his life, as he was escaping Paris as the Nazis came there, he also managed to use his connections to ensure the safety of 16 Jewish people from Paris. In Ulysses, Bloom faces people throughout who hold anti-Semitic views, mostly covert or casual. Daedalus, before ever we meet Bloom, hears plenty of overt anti-Semitism himself, despite him being raised Catholic and not in any way bringing up the matter. In terms of this covert anti-Semitism, we have many who casually delineate Bloom or others as different without it bothering them too much, but enough to be recognised and made a point of. They see Bloom as not quite Irish, or at least as an outsider. Particularly, they mock a guy called Reuben J, based on Reuben Dodd, who was a real person who lived in Dublin at the time. He would be more orthodox in his Judaism and dressed appropriately. He gets first reference in Hades and crops up again after, but never in a positive fashion, in the voices of the other people. This is Joyce trying to speak the truth of the time. Joyce hated, let's say, petty lies for casual, for the ease of the audience. He wanted to paint the Dublin for the good and the bad, and this, I believe, from what we can tell, he saw as the bad. As for overt anti-Semitism, there are two major characters in the book who are engaged with this. A guy called DC and the Citizen, both of whom are modelled on real people. DC shows up in Nestor, the second chapter, and he is the title character of the chapter. He is there holding Daedalus's wage, so Daedalus is kind of forced to listen to him. DC's modelled on Francis Irwin, who was, according to Richard Ellman, which is Joyce's biographer, an Ulster Scot and very pro-British. DC speaks of a plot to destroy England, and while Stephen's not really somebody who's interested in it, he doesn't really fight the matter here, instead allowing DC's hateful speech to taint his own mind with images of gold-skinned men that were at the Paris Stock Exchange. The power of hate is the power to taint the unwilling. Already that morning, he's already heard Haynes talking about the Jewish problem in England in front of Daedalus. It's everywhere. For an Irish audience, Haynes being English, well, he's always going to be hateful, and we are okay with that. We are sown the seed that this fella, he's not to be accepted or trusted, and his views are not to be accepted or trusted from the get-go in terms of Haynes. DC is Irish, and he's also difficult though, because it's more difficult to take it from somebody of your own background. But ultimately, he, as an apologist for the empire, it's not too hard to just dismiss him. His last lines, however, are a chilling warning of the xenophobia that did come to fruition in Ireland, particularly in the 30s in terms of Judaism, and the 1990s in terms of more race-based xenophobia. "I just wanted to say," he said, "Ireland, they say, has the honour of being the only country that never persecuted the Jews. Do you know that? No? And do you know why?" He frowned sternly on the bright air. "Why, sir?" Stephen asked, beginning to smile. "Because she never let them in," Mr. Ducey said solemnly. In chapter 12, Bloom has an encounter with the Citizen in Barney Kieran's pub. The Citizen's a kind of a stand-in for Michael Cusick, a founder of the GAA and famously a nationalist. In fact, you could call him an ultranationalism, and it's this ultranationalism that is taken to its logical extreme as the Citizen practically attempts to smite Bloom on a couple of occasions, vocally and in the end physically, as much as the Cyclops tried to end Odysseus. The two debate nationalism, Bloom generally having the upper hand, and by using his brain and intelligent arguments, using the power of love, if you like. Meanwhile, the Citizen eventually collapsed into mindless shouts of Sinn Féin awan, which means basically ourselves alone as one. Bystanders try to shake Bloom with taunts about his wife, but Bloom is resolutely a person of love. He does his best to ignore this. In the end, Bloom it is who slays the Cyclops, pointing out his petty ignorances. Mendelssohn was a Jew, and Karl Marx and Mercadante, and Spinoza, and the Saviour was a Jew, and his father was a Jew. You're God. "He had no father," said Martin. "That'll do now. Drive ahead." "Who's God?" said the Citizen. "Well, his uncle was a Jew," says he. "Your God was a Jew. Christ was a Jew, like me." "Gob!" The Citizen made a plunge back into the shop. "By Jesus," he says, "I'll brain that bloody Jewman for using the holy name. By Jesus, I'll crucify him, so I will." That last line's a gem. The Citizen wants to clobber Bloom for using the holy name in vain, followed by Jesus, I'll crucify him, so I will. A failure to engage with the words he says, a failure to engage on the level of love, or on the intellectual level for that matter. It leads him to him demonstrating his hypocrisy and his small-mindedness. At heart, one of the Citizen's big stumbling blocks is his petty and unsophisticated nationalisms. He refuses to acknowledge how Bloom can be Irish because he's Jewish, even though he was born there. Similarly, we can see in Ireland's recent history the problem of how can we absorb people into our culture? How can we integrate and bring them in with us when they are not traditionally the ideal of what this petty nationalism admits as Irish? It exists in the US in terms of Catholics for a long time too. The idea that being black or Jewish can prevent you from being American is mindless. As somebody who's not a citizen of the United States, I find it distressing that I'm better treated here than people who are citizens. Not that citizenship should matter a damn, to take Bloom's thread of love being the lead. Citizenship shouldn't be what defines us, no more than anything else, but who we are. By no means is Joyce or Bloom or any of us the perfect person. We all have our flaws, but we do what we can, or what we should do, or what we need to do, which is to engage with people from a place of love. And while acknowledging our differences, accept these and accept each other without concern for ethnicity, race, or religion, other than or gender or sexuality or anything else, other than it is something that is important and that is something that helps our identity, but it does not limit our identity. It isn't easy growing up with these prejudices that are sold to us on a daily basis. But we do owe it to each other to work a lot harder to do it a lot better.